Welcome back to the program. As promised, I'm joined by the Resources Minister, who's just recently spoken at the National Press Club in Canberra. He joins us from our studios there. Thanks very much for your company.
Nice to be with you, Peter.
I should say Josh Frydenberg, not just the Resources Minister, for anyone who doesn't recognise you. But let's get to your portfolio in a moment. I've got to start with the potential for the pre-selection showdown in the seat of Goldstein down in your neck of the woods in Victoria and Melbourne in particular. The Human Rights Commissioner, Tim Wilson, he's resigned his post to have a crack at the seat. I understand that the Downers are looking to have a fourth generation into Parliament. Georgina Downer is at least considering running. I'm not sure if she's actually formally nominated yet. You used to staff for Alexander Downer. Let me guess, you're supporting Georgina?
Look, I'm hopeful that Georgina runs and she gets the support of the local pre-selectors. I don't get a vote. But as Andrew Robb said, who's the current seat holder in Goldstein, it's very good if a number of top people put their hand forward, and Tim Wilson is very well respected. He would make a very good member of Parliament. But Georgina Downer is also very highly credentialed and has been active in the party. She's on our administrative committee and she's got an excellent academic record as well as being a former diplomat for Australia. So I hope she puts her hand up, but let's just see what happens.
But it really does seem like the Downer clan stick together. If this would be a fourth generation, it's also all the Downer ex-staffers that are advocating for her. Greg Hunt, yourself, Alan Tudge. Pretty nice to have friends in high places.
Well, I mean, Andrew Robb was never a staffer for Georgina, nor was Jeff Kennett, who came out strongly for her today. People like
Jeff Kennett came out strongly for her today.
Yeah, and but at the end of the day, you need to win the support of the local electors, not necessarily the ministers and former ministers in Canberra and elsewhere. And I got a piece of advice one day, Peter, from an old colleague, Brett Mason, who said, when it comes to pre-selection, you can be Abraham Lincoln with 3 Olympic gold medals, but if you haven't done the numbers in the local branches, you just won't win. And that's true. You need to win the support of the local electors, and if Georgina puts her hand up, and no doubt Tim is already doing that, that's what they'll be trying to do.
Let's switch to another subject. I want to talk to you about Labor's negative gearing policy, if we can, for a moment before we get to resources. A moment ago, you were extolling the virtue of Jeff Kennett backing Georgina Downer. Jeff Kennett is also very disappointed, his words, with the coalition for not backing Labor's negative gearing policy. He's a clever man, Jeff Kennett, isn't he? Both in who he backs for pre-selection and what he says about negative gearing.
Well, as Treasurer Scott Morrison has said, we're keeping an open mind about some of the excesses of negative gearing, but as for Labor's policy, there's a few points that need to be made. Firstly, over the next 4 years, it's going to produce less than $600 million worth of revenue, which is actually less than the interest bill that we pay each month on the debt that Labor left us. The second point is, by confining negative gearing to just new homes, that will drive up the prices of new homes. And if you think about areas...
But hang on. We can go through the talking points in a moment, Josh Frydenberg. What about the fact that...
have you read them, have you?
What about the fact that, well, they always get distributed for both sides, we know that, but what about the fact that Jeff Kennett is worth listening to in a pre-selection, but not worth listening to on a policy debate? Scott Ryan was on here earlier and he described Jeff Kennett as one of the great reforming minds of Liberal Party history.
Well, Jeff Kennett's record speaks for itself. He set Victoria up for many years after being, as Scott Ryan rightly says,
he's to be listened to then, isn't he?
Who took the hard decisions. He is, but you don't always have to agree with Jeff Kennett. He's been proposing lifting the GST for some time and having flat levels of tax as well at various income tax levels. I mean, look, these are Jeff's ideas. He's absolutely entitled to them. He's made a great contribution to public life. We'll continue to do so, but we'll formulate our own policies.
You mentioned the GST. Did the decision, which was embedded today, there's been a fair bit of speculation around it, an assumption that it would end at being dead, buried and cremated, but that was formalised today by words from the Prime Minister just this morning. Did that decision go to Cabinet, or was that a captain's call?
Oh, well, it won't surprise you that I'm not going to discuss the details of Cabinet decisions other than to say there's been extensive discussion, consultation and deliberation about various tax options by the Cabinet and elsewhere within the party structure.
But I'm not asking you to reveal deliberations at Cabinet, just simply whether or not...
Yes, you are.
No, I'm simply asking...
You're a stirrer, Pete. You might love it.
I'm not after deliberations and who said what and where and who was for and against, just whether or not the Cabinet made the decision whether or not the GST was to be dumped, or the Prime Minister made the decision independently of the Cabinet.
I'm just not going to go there other than to say we have had extensive discussions.
That would have to be a no
the Cabinet
then,
and
surely.
elsewhere. No, well, you read into it whatever you like, but I wouldn't necessarily jump to conclusions by me playing a straight back to your cheeky questions.
But it's not a cheeky question, Josh Frydenberg. I'm just wanting to... No, but I'm not looking for deliberations. I don't want to know if Scott Morrison argued for a GST and so did Arthur Sinodinos, and then the Prime Minister disagreed and Christopher Pyne was on the Prime Minister's side. Whether that happened or not, who knows? I just want to know whether or not Cabinet even considered it. It's a legitimate question, because if Cabinet didn't consider it, then who did? Just a Prime Minister as a captain's pick, a gang of 4 around the finance team that you used to be part of in your previous portfolio? That's a legitimate question.
Well, a legitimate question or not, were I to reveal the nature and the type of discussions that
I'm not
we
asking
had at
for
Cabinet...
that, just whether it went to Cabinet.
But you... Well, I can't tell you what even has been discussed in detail in Cabinet or not, because I'm not at liberty to do that. That's what is called Cabinet in confidence.
But you are at liberty to just tell me whether it went to Cabinet or whether it was a decision of the Prime Minister. I mean, this at the moment has been left unclear, and don't worry, you're not alone, because it was also unclear after I spoke to Scott Ryan.
Well, as you know, Peter, you could take any policy area, run the same question to me, and you'll get the same answer. Unfortunately, I'm not going to detail what was discussed or not discussed at Cabinet, other than to say there has been some extensive discussions, important discussions about taxation reform more generally, and the Prime Minister is very consultative with both his Cabinet and his colleagues more broadly.
I tell you why I don't think it went to Cabinet. Because last night, Michaelia Cash on Sky News, who is a member of Cabinet, was saying that the GST was still on the table. And this morning, the Prime Minister said, no, it's not. So it couldn't have gone to Cabinet unless she slept through the discussion.
Well, you keep playing with those gotcha moments and see what happens.
It's a legitimate question. Last night, a Cabinet Minister said that the GST was still on the table. Now, unless there was a Cabinet meeting this morning, that I don't think there was, the Prime Minister this morning said that the GST is not on the table. So presumably that's a captain's call.
On to the next one, Pete.
All right, well, I hope somebody in the press gallery, if you're watching, is going to ask the Prime Minister at his next media conference whether or not it was a captain's call or whether or not it went to Cabinet, because there is some sort of inconsistency there, but Josh Frydenberg's not playing ball. Let's talk about resources. You gave a speech today at the National Press Club in this space. I saw some of the answers that you were giving around issues to do with India. How important to the resources sector is solidifying a free trade deal with India?
Look, very important because I think it will spur greater cooperation across a range of areas, not just within the resources sector. The Indian Minister for Coal and Renewable Energy and Power, Minister Goyal, was in Canberra last week, and I had an extensive meeting with him. He's certainly looking to Australia to supply the energy that India needs as it continues down the path of greater urbanisation and growing the middle class. You see, there are 300 million people in India with no access to electricity or very little access to electricity, and India wants to put all those people on the grid by 2022. That's very ambitious, and they can do that with a variety of sources of energy, including renewables, but they really do need coal for baseload power, and Australia, as you know, has plenty of coal to export.
India's, of course, a huge country. It won't be long before it overtakes China as the largest nation in the world. We've had reports that Australia, according to the Bureau of Statistics, has just hit 24 million people. Do you believe in a big Australia?
I do believe in a bigger Australia, one that is
a big
generous.
Australia.
A bigger. I believe in a bigger Australia, but obviously we have to ensure that we're planning well in our cities, and that's something that the Prime Minister is focused on. He's now got Angus Taylor assisting him with that. I think that's very important, because you don't want too much congestion in the cities, and we are such a big country that if we plan properly, we should be able to cope with a bigger population than we have.
Okay, the Prime Minister's office have actually confirmed that the GST was a cabinet decision. So they've obviously, in your version of the Westminster system, broken cabinet solidarity and revealed that. That just means that Michaelia Cash obviously wasn't listening, or at least didn't want to be the one to make the announcement, presumably, last night.
I think that's a very unfair assessment of Michaelia, and it won't surprise you for me to say that.
All right, on the resources, what happens to WA? I mean, we saw that Western Australia's credit rating has now dropped even below Tasmania's, believe it or not. In fairness to the West, they don't get a fair share of their GST revenue. They've bemoaned that for some time, as you'd well know, but it is highly dependent on the resources sector, which is very much your area of responsibility, obviously. What does that mean for the future of the West in the short and medium term, if not the long term, when we perhaps get back around to another mining boom?
Well, certainly the royalty stream is not flowing in the same way that it did when prices were higher to states like Western Australia, and we've also seen a drop-off in the exploration and investment that we saw when prices were extremely high. But my message today was that the glass is half full when it comes to the resources sector. To paraphrase Mark Twain, Peter, reports of the death of the Australian resource sector are greatly over-exaggerated, because there is going to be increased demand, particularly from India. China is growing from a much larger base, which is significant, and iron ore, the area that Australia is dominant in the world as the #1 exporter of iron ore, and particularly out of the Pilbara and Western Australia. We have great economies of scale, great efficiencies, proximity to markets. I think the demand for our product will continue to be very strong.
That sounds like financial advice, Minister Frydenberg. Buy BHP and Rio. You think they're underpriced?
Look, it's not for me to give financial advice, but I did note that they did have a jump on the stock markets today.
They did. Well, the whole market did, actually, 2 days in a row. I was exclaiming about that earlier, how unusual it is in the current climate. Your new junior minister, at least for Northern Australia, is Matt Canavan, the well-known senator and I think former chief of staff, correct me if I'm wrong, for Barnaby Joyce for the National Party up in Queensland. He's previously advocated the idea of a new state for the north of Australia to enter the Commonwealth. It would obviously require some sort of constitutional reform. Is that something you're prepared to look at?
Well, firstly, it's great to have Matt Canavan working with me on the development of Northern Australia. This is 40% of our country, Peter, and it only has 5% of the population, but certainly between us we've got a lot of ground to cover, and Matt's got extensive experience in that space, and he'll make a great contribution. As for making a new state for the north of Australia, that's not in my list of immediate priorities, that's for sure.
But are you open to it though? Because the reason I ask is because I know there's now a push from the Northern Territory to become a state internally. Previously, as you'd be well aware, the Howard government let that go to a referendum, I believe, and it failed, or at least they put it out there. It wasn't successful, not a referendum, but a plebiscite internally, I think, for Northern Territorians. But an idea that actually brought in the top of Queensland, or the tip of Queensland, to go with the Northern Territory might make for a more viable state in a population sense.
Well, those issues, for example, with the Northern Territory are matters for their own population, but there are positives and negatives about going down the path of statehood. If you are an individual state, you'll get less support in the case of Northern Queensland from Brisbane and other southern parts of Queensland. If you're the Northern Territory, you're going to get less support from the Commonwealth Government because you're no longer a territory and you become a state. I don't think that statehood should be a major priority either for the Northern Territory or for Northern Queensland at this point. I think there are a lot of other challenges that they have to meet their potential and to develop Australia's north, and certainly Matt and myself and the Turnbull government more generally are going to be focused on those economic development opportunities that are now presenting itself.
What are the two biggest things you hope to achieve in your time as Resource Minister?
The two biggest things, well, today I mentioned one of them, which was to get better cooperation from Geoscience Australia and providing more information about satellite imagery, core sampling, data mapping for the resources sector to enhance investment and exploration, particularly at this time of the downward cycle. And the other thing I would like to do is just to promote good bilateral relationships with our key economic partners. I've already been to Japan for a series of bilateral meetings. I've been actively involved within the APEC and the G20 and the International Energy Agency discussions, and next week I'm off to the United States for a major energy conference which will bring all the leaders in the energy world together in one place. So I think it's very important for Australia, which has such a dominant position in global markets, as soon to be the #1 exporter of LNG in the world, and already the #1 exporter of coal in the world, and the #1 exporter of iron ore in the world, to be present at the table with all these other major customers of ours to ensure that we get proper access to markets and we reduce the tariffs that may be currently in existence.
Josh Frydenberg, always appreciate talking to you. Thanks for your company once again today on Newsday. Thanks.
Terrific. Great to be with you.